The Reasonable Radicalisation of Ashli Babbitt. Lessons from First Reformed about radicalisation. Part 1. I don't acknowledge it at all. There have been a million statements that Trump has made in only the last 6 months that should have sunk him, that could have and still would sink anyone else. So many things said, tweeted, truthed, that should have signalled the death knell for his political livelihood or credibility or viability. But there's one that sticks with me, more than any other. It happened during the televised debate between Kamala Harris and Trump during the 2024 election, the only debate they held this election cycle. No, it was not him going on a racist, senile tirade about Haitian immigrants, although, yes, that as well. An entire essay could be written about that moment alone. No, it was a different moment that truly shocked me. Not that he said it, mind you, but that it was ever moved on from, for the rest of the debate and the election cycle. It was the moment where Trump was asked, point blank, by the moderators,
Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't.
Trump responded immediately, without pause or reflection, practically spilling over the question to respond.
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
But
You know
those-
that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten.
Trump is pushed slightly further by the moderator, who says as quick as he can to get in words before being interrupted.
Watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker, we didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them
No
Republican.
judge looked at it.
But the moderator's response was nearly inaudible, drowned out by Trump's interruption.
Many of them
No
Republican,
judge looked at it.
and said there
They
was
said
no
we didn't have
widespread fraud.
standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
And finally, the moderator responds.
Mr. President, thank you.
Do you might be wondering where I'm going with all of this so far? You see, I will come back to much of what Trump said above. We will litigate, at least to some degree, his statements. But I want to merely point you to one thing. The then budding president refused point blank to accept the previous election's results. An election, lest we forget, and I will not allow us to forget, ended with an attempted insurrection, spearheaded by the then sitting president, refusing to admit defeat. I say all of this to come back to his answer to the question, are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020? Which, remember, was, I don't acknowledge it at all. Part 2. Reasonable Radicalisation. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a conundrum that I've been wrestling a lot with recently. I heard a friend of mine, who has been very successfully radicalised online, talk about his concerns about what he thinks is happening to his country. And when I thought about what he was saying, and when I thought about the types of things I saw him posting, I had a sudden realisation which really shook me. If you believed these things were happening, genuinely and sincerely, radicalisation, radical action, would be the logical next step. And it would be logical. It would be reasonable. That's the thing with radicalisation, isn't it? If what you're saying is true, it truly is the only thing left to do. Let me give you an odd example. In August of 1791, the enslaved people of Haiti mounted a rebellion and revolution, and by 1804, Haiti was independent. You can imagine, however, in the early days of such rebellious and revolutionary movements such as this, the instigators and leaders of this movement were viewed as radicals, even by their kin and community, as people tempting fate, tempting further tribulation. But of course, in the face of generations of enslaved people, radical action is the only action. The radicals were correct, and violence was necessary. I see so much of this logic in reactionary movements today. Think about the cruelty and inhumane discussions that surround trans topics. Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, conservative figures, have both separately stated regarding gender ideology that it must be eradicated from public life.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
A deeply worrying, borderline genocidal statement. But this can only be understood if we consider the types of things these people and their broader movements believe, or say they believe, about trans people. Groomers, rapists, brainwashing children, sneaking into female spaces, these are all the accusation levied on trans people, especially trans women. And so, whilst unbelievably cruel and capricious, which it obviously is, it sort of makes sense, in a general sense, why the right are so unbelievably hostile to these people, to this identity group. The things they believe they are doing in their minds justifies it. And whilst I would undoubtedly oppose any rhetoric that involves the word eradicate, we do have to recognise that if people genuinely believe they are opposing grooming, rape, paedophilia, words like eradicate become almost second nature. They are logical, even reasonable. So having said all of this, why did I start this discourse with that section of the Trump-Harris debate? Part 3. You're allowed to go by very different rules. January 6th was a moment in US politics that's really stuck with me. Clearly, if you watched my video Grok's Inner Mecha Hitler. At the time it happened, like many, I thought it was ridiculous and grotesque, but to be honest, in a similar way to most riots. Granted, the Trump and Confederate flags gave it a tinge more horror than your average riot, but I didn't think much of it a week later. After all we know now, and after spending much more time actually researching the event and all that led to it, I have a very different feeling. January 6th was a unique event not just because it was so dramatic, but because it was a top-down affair. This was not just a natural groundswell, but the obvious next step. The reasonable radicalization of a mass of people who were told the same thing time and time again by the budding president and all of his associates. Your country was stolen from you, and we are here today to stop the steal. When people talk about the speech Trump gave on the day, people often focus on one or two phrases. On the left, people rightly condemning the speech as inciting a riot or coup will point to a moment where Trump says,
And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
And they look at this moment as a prime example of the ways that Trump directly incited his followers to violent ends. On the right, people claiming the speech has been maligned and that Trump clearly did not want his followers to do this point to the following moment.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Now, you know where I sit in this back and forward. But my frustration with both sides, although obviously especially the right, is that if you were to hear a conversation between them, you might imagine it was a short 20-minute speech. Trump spoke for over an hour. And for either side, but especially MAGA, to cherry-pick one moment and pin the entire vibe and theme of the speech on that is foolish. But I would like to focus on something. Not litigating the entire speech, nor the whole day, but instead showing you the ways that Trump legitimized what the Jan 6 rioters were soon to do, by legitimizing everything they thought had already been done to them, and how reasonable their actions can be justified on the basis of those beliefs. I would like to focus on the claims that Trump made about the election, claims we know he knew were lies. Let me start by showing you a really cool table. This is the Jan 6 committee investigation report. It is a table of all Trump's key players, attorney generals, secretaries of state, etc., testifying to the times they directly told Trump a claim he was making about the election was false. and then him publicly claiming these things within days or weeks of being told. And it goes on like this. For 6 pages, page after page, 18 individual claims Trump has made about the election, about the rigging, the fraud, the stolen ballots, etc., all of which have been testified by his closest allies in government, people he hand-selected, as being categorically false, and told to him as such. All this to say, Trump knew full well, or certainly should have, that each of the claims above and the 15 further were categorically untrue. Claims we heard him make earlier in the Trump-Harris debate. So why is it that every single one of these was said by Trump on the day his supporters rioted the Capitol building? Let me give you a few examples. Trump, on January 6th,
Pennsylvania had 205,000 more votes than it had more. But you don't have to go any. Between that, I think that's almost better than dead people, if you think, right? More votes than they had voters, and many other states also.
And now his Attorney General, Richard Donahue,
we would say to him, we checked that out and there's nothing to it. And we would cite to certain allegations. And so, like such as Pennsylvania, right? No, there were not 250,000 more votes reported than were actually cast. That's not true. So we would say things like that.
This was said to Trump on the 3rd of January, 3 days before he said it to his seething supporters. Let me give you another example.
Even without an audit, the number of fraudulent ballots that we've identified across the state is staggering. Over 10,300 ballots in Georgia were cast by individuals whose names and dates of birth match Georgia residents who died in 2020 and prior to the election.
4 days before the riot, Trump called the then Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. This was an infamous call because in it, Trump is seen demanding Raffensperger find 11,780 votes on the grounds of fraud. During this conversation, Raffensperger tells Trump, after he makes the claim we saw above,
The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted. And I think the number is in close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries, they went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number, and a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. So the actual number were two people that were dead that voted. And so that's wrong. That was
And so hopefully you see my point. Time and time again. And this was a very small sampling of the election fraud claims made by Trump on the day. Over and over again, he repeats and makes sure the people in the front of him hear, your country, every state within it, has been stolen from you. And there is nothing left to do except act. I will leave this section with a final quote from Trump on the day. One that I think perfectly sums up the mood and atmosphere of what he was trying to get across far better than Fight Like Hell or Peacefully and Patriotically.
The Republicans have to get tougher. You're not going to have a Republican Party if you don't get tougher. They want to play so straight. They want to play so, sir, yes, the United States. The Constitution doesn't allow me to send them back to the states. Well, I say, yes, it does, because the Constitution says you have to protect our country and you have to protect our Constitution. And you can't vote on fraud. And fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules.
You can't vote on fraud. When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. What a terrifying sentiment. Part 4. The storm is here. And this and many others were sentiments taken very seriously by Ashli Babbitt, the one rioter who died during the violence on Jan 6th. Babbitt was born in San Diego, California, in the United States Air Force starting in 2004, where she deployed countless times in Iraq, Kuwait, etc. By 2018, she was back on land and had a pool servicing business with her second husband, after a violent incident she provoked broke up her previous marriage. Her politics were initially relatively boring. A centrist libertarian, she had voted for Obama in 2008, saying in a post,
"Fuck yes, I did. He was our president, dude. I love America. I think Obama did great things. I think he jacked some shit up, but I think he did do a lot of good at a time where we needed him. I voted for him, and I voted for Trump. I could not vote for Hillary."
But by 2018, she was showing serious interest in more libertarian and anti-establishment politics, tweeting about Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Rand Paul, etc. This continued until 2019 and 20, where you could see considerably more conspiratorial posting, talking about Pizzagate, QAnon, etc. For the uninitiated, Pizzagate was a belief by the conspiratorial far right that a series of leaked emails from the Clinton campaign proved there was a cabal of satanic, paedophilic, child-sacrificing elites, being enacted by predominantly liberal and democratic elites. This was all because of a reference to a pizza place in the leaked emails, which they believed to be a code, hence Pizzagate. QAnon was a 4chan user who created a pseudo-cult off the back of his posts on 4chan and Twitter. All cryptic, rambling ciphers that are supposed to be interpreted by the followers. The conspiracy cult is where the predominant Pizzagate theories come from. They believed Donald Trump would bring about retribution for the aforementioned cabal and all its supposed perpetrators, the storm. All this to say, Babbitt was becoming increasingly passionate and radicalized. When Trump lost the election, like many of his followers, Babbitt believed this was a fraudulent and stolen election, but in particular, like many of the QAnon crowd, who were the most ardent and zealous of his followers, they vowed to be there, at the Capitol, on the 6th of January, to stop the steal, to make sure to bring about the storm. She posted on the 5th of January, a day before she died.
Nothing will stop us. They can try and try, but the storm is here and it is descending upon D.C. in less than 24 hours. Dark to light.
On Jan 6th, after rioters had breached the Capitol building and made their way through, looking for lawmakers and the Vice President, the rioters continued to push through each barricade, pushing police and Capitol security further back. Ultimately, the police and Capitol security were there to aid in lawmakers and other Capitol Hill politicians fleeing the scene. That was their priority. Ashli Babbitt, draped in a Trump flag, started to climb through a barricaded door, with a tactical knife in her pocket in search for lawmakers, with hundreds of rioters behind her. In the hallways behind the barricaded door, lawmakers were fleeing, some trapped in the hall. Lieutenant Michael Byrd had a firearm pointed at the door, shouting, "Get back, get down, get out of the way." But Babbitt ignored this and climbed through. She was shot in the shoulder, falling back among her compatriots as they filmed her final moments. Her death is filmed in multiple angles. And that is how she became a MAGA martyr. But here's the thing that has to be reminded. What she did was insane, deranged. She clearly had violent or malicious intent, but considering all that she believed, was that really so crazy? Let's quickly list some of the things that Ashli Babbitt believed. The 2020 election had been rigged, fake ballots, rigged voting machines, dead people voting, etc., and that this was a top-down, coordinated affair. Your country has been stolen. The COVID pandemic was fake, and all forms of mandates, lockdowns, masks, vaccines were attempts by the deep state to control its citizens. And finally, there is a cabal of satanic worshipping global elites, predominated by Democrats, that are sexually abusing and sacrificing children to feast on their organs. When we think about what was going on in her head, what she believed was happening to her country, we have to feel at least somewhat sympathetic. Despite the fact that none of what she believed was taking place, she was reasonably radicalized, considering what she believed. Remember, when you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. And she believed in far more than fraud. Part 5. I thought people would listen. There was a movie I watched not long ago that really got me thinking about all of this. The movie is titled First Reformed, written and directed by Paul Schrader, writer of Taxi Driver, released in 2017. Before we start, the following section will involve major spoilers for the movie, signposted in particular later on, so please be warned. In the movie, the main character, Ernst Toller, played by Ethan Hawke, plays a pastor in a tiny parish in Albany, New York. His life is listless. He is an army veteran with a particularly tragic family background, and his life is now slow and quietly miserable. But there is at least seemingly a peace to it.
Are your garments
That peace is disrupted when one day he is approached by a parishioner, a young pregnant woman named Mary. She's worried about her partner, Michael, who she says has become increasingly radicalised by his environmental concerns, terrified by the prospects of bringing life into this dying world. She asks him to visit her husband, to speak to him, counsel him, and to try and help him with his feelings of despair. This is a small section of the husband telling Ernst what's bothering him, why he is in such despair.
I mean, 1/3 of the natural world has been destroyed in your lifetime. You know, the Earth's temperature will be 3 degrees centigrade higher. 4 is the threshold. You know, severe, widespread, and irreversible impacts. And when scientists say stuff like that, National Center for Atmospheric Research, Lawrence Livermore, Potsdam Institute, Reverend...
He went on like that for some time. By 2050, sea levels 2 feet higher on the East Coast. Low-lying areas underwater across the world. Bangladesh, 20% loss of landmass. Central Africa, 50% reduction in crops due to drought. The western reservoirs dried up, climate change, refugees, epidemics, extreme weather.
You know, the bad times, they will begin, and from that point, everything moves very quickly. You know, this social structure can't bear the stress of multiple crises. Opportunistic diseases, anarchy, martial law, the tipping point. And this isn't in some distant future. You will live to see this. You know, my children will experience this unlivability, this, I'm sorry, I just, I thought things could change, you know? I thought people would listen.
Toller tries to handle this despair, to deal with it directly, to address these concerns, answer his questions, but they keep coming. Later in the dialogue between them, as Michael has finished telling Toller about climate activists, martyrs who died for the cause, he says,
Hey, as Dorothy Stang, 2005, she was a nun from Ohio. And what was the purpose of their death? You know, in 2010, the IPCC predicted that if drastic action wasn't taken by 2015, environmental collapse would be irreversible, and nothing was done. And now it's 2017.
The following section involves major spoilers. You have been warned. To try and get him to understand his rebuttal, his arguments for life, for having a family, for not despairing, Toller tells Michael about his family background, what led him to the faith.
My father taught at VMI. I encouraged my son to enlist. It was a family tradition. Like his father, my father, before me. A patriotic tradition. My wife was very opposed. My son enlisted anyway, and 6 months later he was dead in Iraq. Right? I talked my son into a war that had no moral justification. My wife could no longer live with me. I left the military. I was lost. And Reverend Jeffords from Abundant Life, he gave me this position at First Reform, and here I am.
Toller eventually leaves, with not much progress with Michael, and the two agree to meet again. Toller's informed days later by Mary that she has discovered an explosive suicide vest in her husband's garage. Toller takes this and says that he won't inform the police to protect Michael. He receives a call from Michael days later to meet at a park. When he arrives, Michael is found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. As the movie proceeds, after Michael's death and funeral, we see Toller becoming more and more despairing himself. Now, he has plenty in his past to despair about, but we see him focus his energy and despair on precisely what Michael was despairing. The environmental destruction of the earth at man's hand, and his church's seeming complicity with it. There is a snippet of this as he starts to read into more of what Michael was discussing in a conversation with the owner and pastor, Joel Jeffers, of the megachurch that bought out his parish. He's told that the funeral of Michael, which was, as requested by Michael, environmentally themed, hosted at a toxic waste dump with an environmental protest song, was inappropriate and has offended various sponsors of the megachurch. Toller responds,
Jesus doesn't want our suffering. He suffered for us. He wants our commitment and our obedience.
And what of his creation? The heavens declare the glory of God. God is present everywhere, in every plant, every river, every tiny insect. The whole world is a manifestation of his holy presence. I think this is an issue where the church can lead, but they say nothing. The U.S. Congress still denies climate change? Where were we when these people were elected?
But his fervour only gets worse as he starts to drink more and go deeper in his research, starting to go through Michael's old computer, getting deeper and deeper in his understanding of just how bad things have gotten environmentally. In particular, Michael had collected evidence of the impact of the sponsors of the megachurch, the one that owns Toller's parish, has had on the environment through multiple companies they own. His fervour grows more and more, and this culminates to Toller deciding to don the suicide jacket, to blow up his church on its 250th anniversary, in which the CEO and various other sponsors will be there. I will not spoil the ending of the movie, as it is extraordinary, but I will tell you this. When Toller starts to put on the jacket, as he starts to silently engage in this plan, I was fully bought in. It felt reasonable. By the time you reach his decision, you have been radicalized along with him. By the end of the movie, through the journey of reasonable radicalization surrounding a topic many, including myself, will fundamentally agree, you come to understand what Michael was saying.
You know, in 2010, the IPCC predicted that if drastic action wasn't taken by 2015, environmental collapse would be irreversible, and nothing was done. And now it's 2017.
To being prepared to destroy in service of something bigger. Because things have gotten that bad. Because there is nothing else to do. You're allowed to go by very different rules. Part 6. Dark to Light. Hopefully the parallels between Toller and Babbitt are not lost to you. Both veterans, both lost family due to personal error or failing, both started their journey relatively passive and ordinary in their beliefs, but by the end of their journeys, through a slow process of engaging with more and more rhetoric, research, evidence, they were prepared to risk everything, don their own armour, and die as martyrs. But, hopefully, for most of you, you recognise one key difference. Babbitt was lied to. Toller wasn't. The climate catastrophe is just that, a catastrophe. We are reeling closer and closer to the nightmare that Michael forewarned. But the big lie that Babbitt bought, the storm she believed was coming, the dark to light, all of this was a lie. Categorically false. It was proven time and time again. It was the desperate conniving deceptions of a sore loser and despot. A top-down deception that she bought hook, line and sinker. However, there is a problem. Whether or not what Babbitt believed was a lie is immaterial in the impact it had on her and hundreds and thousands of others. In a 2023 survey, 29% of Americans, 63% of Republicans believe the 2020 election was stolen, fraudulent, that their democracy is fundamentally hollowed out from within. And again, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Their political leader and everyone below him has continuously reinforced this belief.
In 2020.
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
That.
You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically.
Remember, that was said on a debate stage in the lead up to the election. The previous debate had ruined the political legitimacy of the incumbent and the then President Joe Biden. This debate, in which Trump ranted and raved, dribbled and drooled his way through, barely scraped his credibility to his supporters, to people like Babbitt. And we have to think about why that is. Why are these lies so attractive? Why are they so believable when they are so resolutely disproven, so undeniably false? Time and time again, in and out of court, each claim Trump made, 60 cases lost. And yet a good portion of Americans today will still talk about Georgian suitcases full of ballots, Dominion voting machines rigged, etc. How can these lies be so pervasive? I don't really mean to answer that question in depth. There are so many answers to it. But it's important for us to acknowledge this conundrum and to take more seriously the beliefs and their logical conclusions. That is what I have aimed to do in this essay, not prescribe a cure, but recognise the ailment. Millions of people around the globe are being radicalised, but to all of them, they are reasonably reacting to what they are being told. In Europe, the perception for many, including so many of my own countrymen and women, is that there are raving gangs of marauding, terrorist-sympathising, Sharia-implementing rapists roaming the streets. This perception is fundamentally false. There are sporadic cases of some of these concerns, but unsurprisingly, rape, domestic abuse, child abuse, religious extremism, these are all pretty universal crimes across culture, despite what you are constantly being told. But the perception is there, because so many are being fed non-stop images, stories, data, all with a fundamental direction and agenda, much like the lies Trump told about the election. My friend who I mentioned earlier in this essay, when I saw the things he was posting, it made me so sad for him. His world was so much scarier, so much more hostile. The things he believed was happening around him were mostly fictitious or grossly exaggerated, but the impact they had on his life was sizable, just like they were to Babbitt. But there is another significant difference, isn't there, between Toler and Babbitt's radicalisation, that being the reaction. When Michael takes his own life, a form of radical action in its own right, his response to the horrors of today, and Toler respects his wishes for an environmentally themed funeral, he is punished. His actions are viewed as inappropriate, as radical in and of themselves. After Babbitt was shot, in the midst of her hunt for lawmakers, in the fight to keep Donald Trump in power, Trump sent a video message to be played at a vigil commemorating her.
Great honor to address each of you gathered today to cherish the memory of Ashli Babbitt, a truly incredible person. To Ashli's family and friends, please know that her memory will live on in our hearts for all time. I especially want to express my great sympathy to Ashli's loving husband, Aaron, and her wonderful mother, Mickey. I spoke to both of them into great people. Together we grieve her terrible loss. There was no reason Ashli should have lost her life that day. We must all demand justice for Ashli and her family. So on this solemn occasion, as we celebrate her life, we renew our call for a fair and nonpartisan investigation into the death of Ashli Babbitt. I offer my unwavering support to Ashli's family and call on the Department of Justice to reopen its investigation into her death on January 6th.
That was in 2021, right after Jan 6 and Babbitt's death. In 2025, when Donald Trump became president again, he awarded Babbitt's family a $5 million settlement in a wrongful death suit. In an interview not long before this decision was made, he said,
"Well, I'll look into that. I mean, you're just telling me that for the first time. I haven't heard that. I'm a big fan of Ashli Babbitt, okay? And Ashli Babbitt was a really good person who was a big MAGA fan, Trump fan, and she was innocently standing there. They even say trying to sort of hold back the crowd. And a man did something to her that was unthinkable when he shot her. And I think it's a disgrace. I'm going to look into that. I did not know that."
Can you imagine, in the world of First Reformed, if Toler went ahead, blew up the church, killing everyone in it for his righteous cause of environmental catastrophe, or was caught trying, if the then president, let's imagine Hillary Clinton or Barack Hussein Obama, had spoken at his funeral, spoke about the horrors of climate change, sent a video commemoration? Can you imagine? Part 7. Now it's 2017. What would it have been like to sit down and talk to Babbitt in the days before she died? Would it have been the same as talking to Michael? Toller gets radicalized over the course of a conversation in First Reformed. Not immediately, but fundamentally his world is never the same. His actions cannot be the same. He was reasonably radicalized. He could not do otherwise. Would we have experienced the same thing with Babbitt? Plenty clearly did. When Toller goes to see Michael, he is in a room of graphs, statistics, images, propaganda for sure, but in his case, factual, as propaganda can sometimes be. What would her room have looked like? How many facts would she have pointed to? How many videos? All of the claims we saw Trump make, I'm sure she would have cited them all. And many more, even more radical and bombastic than Trump would admit. Toller says,
if drastic action wasn't taken by 2015, environmental collapse would be irreversible.
But what would Babbitt have said? Well, in her case, we know what she was told on the day.
Well, I say yes, it does, because the Constitution says you have to protect our country and you have to protect our Constitution. And you can't vote on fraud. And fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules.
And again, we know how seriously she took that sentiment. In both Toller and Babbitt's case, we have to recognize there was nothing else that could have been done in their minds. And we have to contend with the realities of those feelings. We have to recognize the depth and sincerity of people's beliefs and deal with them head on. Because something has to be done, doesn't it? I don't know what, but something must change. Because there is a difference between their radicalization, isn't there? One that we can't ignore. Despite the internal feelings of both beliefs, one was true and one was not. The Haitian Revolution was a radical but necessary step towards liberation. Jan 6 was the culmination of one of the most grotesque and persistent political manipulations in American history. The climate crisis is real and we are moving ever closer to catastrophe. Trans people are not a danger or threat to anyone. How do we get people to be radicalized by the right things, radical action in the right direction? What is so compelling about First Reformed is Michael and Toller are right in their radicalization, right in their despair, not in their action, but certainly in their concerns. When we watch Toller going through Michael's research, his evidence, it's compelling because it's actually true. Right now, it's true. What is so feeble about MAGA and broader conservative movements today is how disappointingly opaque the lies are. But we have to remember these lies are coming from the top down. From president to senator to cabinet pick to media figure to alternative media figure to Twitter user. And they are repeated ad nauseum. It is a hydra we have to tackle. Conclusion. We need the right kind. Let's return to the worst thing Donald Trump ever said. And in tackling the hydra, we have to realise he should never have been allowed to move on. There can be no question worth asking Harris if Trump refuses to concede that question. The moderators should have berated him, shouted at him, belittled him, until he finally admitted defeat or left the building. There can be no world where the sitting president of the United States still refuses to concede his previous loss. And yet we live in that world. And until that can be properly acknowledged, people like Ashli Babbitt will continue to be reasonably radicalized. That's what makes Trump's words in that debate so dangerous. Not the lie itself, but the way it gave people permission to build an entire worldview on falsehood. Ashli Babbitt wasn't an aberration, she was the logical conclusion. And there have and will be plenty more like her, unless we can actively stop the lie, get in front of the lie. Be willing to be out there, to talk louder, to appear in dirty, even nasty places just to make sure our voices are heard loud and clear. Harris decided during the election to not appear on Joe Rogan for many reasons. She should have gone. But so should have every credible scientist during COVID or civil rights lawyer during BLM. We cannot cede the largest platform, however toxic, to bad actors unchallenged. Radicalization is not the problem. There are a million reasons to be justly, reasonably radicalized. The difference between Babbitt and Toller is not one was sincere and the other was not. The distinction is the line between a radicalism that saves the world and one that burns it down. If radicalization is inevitable, then the question isn't whether we will be radicalized, it's whether we radicalize around reality or around delusion. The right has chosen its many lies, and the tragedy is that whilst they readily storm the Capitol in defense of a fiction, too many of us hesitate to rise in defense of the truth. The climate is collapsing, democracy is corroding, justice is deferred. We don't need less radicalism. We need the right kind.
Who's gonna take on the big machine? Who's gonna stand up and save the earth? This all starts with you and me.